What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Plant and Spear Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse, and welcome to the show. This is a big one, big week, rivalry week. This is probably, in my opinion, this is the best week of the season just because it's rivalry games all across the country. And rivalry games are one of the things that really make college football special. It's what makes it so much fun. I understand that NFL has teams that don't like each other, but there's nothing like a good college football rivalry. And, one of the most storied, one of the best, biggest, most hated rivalries in all of college football is Florida State. And so this is definitely one that I've been looking forward to all season. There is always a lot of that discussion in the fan base, and I understand none of us like either team, but, which one is your biggest rival for what reason, and whether it's Florida or Miami. And you guys know I've said in the past that I think I dislike Miami a little bit more than Florida. I can't stand either one, to be honest. It's just, I think the big difference for me is when you look at Miami, it's kind of like they only have a very small amount of fans. Like, I honestly think I've only met maybe less than 10 Miami fans in real life. Like, I honestly think they only exist on social media. And you can tell that by their games. But they just stay on us. They stay like we are, I think now because they've become so irrelevant over the years that I think Florida State kind of is their Super Bowl. Like we are who they play for. That's their obviously the only game that they ever have a crowd show up for and things like that. So I think it's just like a smaller voice that is constantly, it's like a chihuahua or something, a small voice that's just constantly yapping at you all the time. At least with Florida, to me, like, we always banter back and forth throughout the year, but they have other things to focus on. They have other rival games. They have other, big games that they have to play. And so they're really annoying for like a week or two out of the year. And then other than that, they kind of have some other things to focus on. But I do know a lot more Florida fans. I did grow up in Southeast Georgia, so it was, that North Florida side of Florida fans. So it's definitely, it's definitely a heated rivalry for me too. And, every time this week comes around, you're reminded how much you can't stand that part of the state and that other fan base. It's just, they are, they are unique. And, SEC fans are bad enough already, and then you add in being Gators, and it's over the top. But this is an exciting game. I think there's a lot on the line in this one, even if it's not per se, the most important chapter in this rivalry. There's obviously been a lot bigger things at stake in the past, but at the same time, this is really huge. And to me, it's even bigger for Florida State this year than Florida because, it's year one with Florida. They've already their season's already pretty much a wash. Really the main highlight for them would be to beat Florida State. So, it is going to be a big game for them too. But when you look at Florida State, like just the season that they've had and the way that things are trending, it's huge for this program because you want to carry that momentum into the offseason. And it would be really, really disappointing to lose to this Florida team who's coming off a loss at Vanderbilt, who has, they're only a 6-win team. So this is, like I said, it would just be, to me, a huge letdown at the end of your season. Whereas if you were to win this game, say even convincingly, a 1-point win's good enough, but, say you were to win this game by a couple scores, and then you take that into the offseason, because of course you have the bowl that you can kind of right the ship with, but, a lot of those are after the early signing day, and, there's going to be opt-outs and things like that by both teams, whoever's in the bowl. So, this was just a huge game for recruiting, for the fan base, for momentum, and everything like that, that it would be a huge letdown to lose, especially when you are the better team and you're at home and you're in a primetime Friday night game. But I think they know that too, and I think they're going to come out aggressive. I think they did a really good job. In a rivalry game, you always have to worry about teams getting too emotional, making mistakes, and maybe things are closer than they should have been. But they did a good job of doing that against Miami, and they didn't let their emotions get to them. They stayed focused. To me, that was pretty much their best game. They really didn't make a whole lot of mistakes. They came firing on all cylinders, and they were good in pretty much every phase of the game. So I don't suspect the way Norvell prepares this team that will really be an issue. I mean, of course, it's going to be heightened emotions, and everybody's going to be excited. I mean, it's going to be a loud, crazy crowd in Doak on Friday night. I'm sure it's going to, this thing's been sold out for months on end. This is like the only ticket that's harder in the country to get than, I guess, Taylor Swift or whatever. I'm not a Taylor Swift fan, no offense, so I don't really know about that whole ticket situation, but you just hear how crazy it is and how hard it is to find tickets to this game. So it's going to be, a crazy environment, and I do think that will be an advantage for FSU. And one other thing, like with looking at Mike Norvell and the way that, he talks about this game and how they prepare for things, and things like that, all year, and this is something that they really focus on. I do think that this is, you saw at the end of the cinematic recap from Louisiana where he said, 6 days and told them to be ready for this moment. And so, it really makes me excited for this one because I feel like Norvell just has a chip on his shoulder. I feel like he's kind of like a shark, that smells blood in the water or whatever, because he's really just kind of opened up these games the last 4 weeks, and I feel like they do have a chance to do that this week. I do think Florida matches up better talent-wise in the last 4 weeks. It's just, how do they come out and play, because they have been inconsistent. But we're going to get to them in just 1 second. Obviously, we're going to touch on two other things real quick. And before we get into that, probably by the time you're listening to that or listening to this podcast, it is Wednesday currently, right now that I'm recording. It's probably going to be Thanksgiving or right after. So happy Thanksgiving to everybody. I hope you guys are having or had a great holiday, or going to have, if you catch this right when it's put out. I hope you guys have a great holiday, just around enjoying football, enjoying family, enjoying food. This is like one of my favorite holidays, but that's probably because I like to eat. So, this is one I look forward to. I mean, any excuse to eat some delicious food and watch football and stuff like that I don't even need an excuse. But so I'm looking forward to it. Not doing a whole lot this year, but I just, like I said, I'm a big fan of Thanksgiving. I'm a dark meat guy, so I'm going for that turkey leg, maybe the turkey wing. That's on my menu. Look, to be honest, there's a lot more desirable meats out there than turkey. Now I've had it fried, I've had it smoked, I've had it every which way. I do love a fried turkey; it is good. And that's what we did last year. So, but I'm a sides guy at the same time. I like to check out the landscape, see what kind of sides we're working with here. Some mac and cheese, some greens. I got my eyes on that. So, and then I'm a dessert guy too because I got a sweet tooth. So I'm hunting down some pie and some ice cream, and just the classics Thanksgiving stuff. So again, you can tell I'm already getting a little excited about it here. So I hope you guys do have a good holiday, and I do understand that this can be a bit of a tough time for some people. So if you are going through that tough time, please reach out to somebody and, just make sure you're taking care of this holiday. There's plenty of good places out there to help take care of each other. So, you guys look out for each other. If you see a Nole in need, please reach out and take care of them. That's what Thanksgiving is all about. And last thing on Thanksgiving, if we're going around the table here and everybody's saying what they're thankful for, I'm going to go with just being a Nole. I know it sounds cliche, but man, just imagine having to live your life wearing blue and orange. Those are some hideous colors. Green and orange too. Ugh. So, I mean, when you think of blue and orange, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Florida. Okay, fair. What's the second thing that comes to mind? For me, Bozo the Clown. I mean, you got the orange hair, the blue and white jumps, clown suit, things like that. So, I mean, it kind of matches the clown program there in Gainesville. So, I'm just, I'm thankful to be a Nole at the end of the day. So, on to the next. We're going to talk a little bit, just real quick, about Louisiana. Florida State dominates 49-17. This game could have been probably 70-3. I mean, it was 35-3 at halftime when most of the starters got pulled out for the second half. It was just a fourth straight dominant performance by Florida State. In the last 4 games, they've outscored opponents 173-39. And realistically, if you think about it, 14 of those points in this game came in garbage time, and 6 of those points against Georgia Tech came in the last second garbage time as well against your second string defense. So, I mean, they could have named their price on this one, and it was nice to see, because one thing that I had tweeted out about when watching this game is, I know people are going to say it's Louisiana. Florida State doesn't really play anybody. And to be fair, they're not a great team. I understand that. But they're still a on the cusp of being bowl eligible and a group of 5 team, and you dominated them like you're supposed to. You dominated the last 3 teams, before them like you were supposed to. Really, in Syracuse may have been a little bit of a surprise, but they have just absolutely beat the brakes off everybody they played in the last 4 games. And that's what you're supposed to do against lesser competition. I mean, how many times do we see on a Saturday across the country teams come out and play down to the competition? I mean, look at what Texas A&M did. They had nobody in the stands as they, I think they were doing like a T-shirt relay around the stadium because they were so bored watching them struggle with A&M. And even Alabama got off to a little bit of a slow start, against Austin Peay. And so you see where it's easy to take a Saturday off and it's easy to play down to the competition. And that's not something this team has done. And that, to me, that's a sign of a good team, is to come out and kick the teeth in of a lesser opponent. So, just again, another dominant game by Florida State. Very nice to see. 6th straight game with over 200 rushing yards. I believe they had 200 already in the first half, which is ridiculous. And you just can't say enough knowing that about what this offensive line and what Alex Atkins, what they've been able to do on the offense. And so just shout out to them. Shout out to this team handling their business. Shout out to Florida State being up so far that they were able to get their walk-on 4th-string quarterback in the game. Shout out Gino. And, it's a great feeling because like we talked about before, this team has not been in a position to really even get the backups any playing time. And so now that you're seeing that 4 straight weeks in a row, your starters are taking less risk of injury. Your starters are more fresh for the next game. You're not exactly worried about coming off a 6-day turnaround for Florida whenever you're sitting here with 99% of your starters sitting around on the bench, in a baseball hat in the second half. Meanwhile, Florida's in a dogfight and losing to Vanderbilt. So it's nice to see as a program to get those guys that playing time, to get them snaps, and to get your starters the rest for the next week. So, again, like I said, another great performance for Florida State this past Saturday against Louisiana. But we're not here to talk about Louisiana because it's Florida week. So, whatever. We're focused on Florida. This is a huge one. And, guys, it's the last week of the season. It's rivalry week. It's a holiday week. I'm just trying to have a little fun on this podcast, not just go straight to the stats and everything. We're just going to kind of kick it around a little bit and have some fun on this episode because it is like I said, it's the last week of the season. And I know now that we have a bowl game to be excited about that I'm looking forward to. But it's kind of crazy to think that the season's already kind of winding down and this is the last week. And, it's sad in a little way because Florida State football is fun to watch again. It's nice to be able to go into any game knowing that you have a legit shot at winning, if not, beating somebody down. So it's just been fun to watch this team again. You hate for it to end because you never know what the future is going to hold. Obviously, there were some missed opportunities this year that this team, probably could have taken advantage of it and been, maybe in a position to put themselves in some conversations. But it's just fun to watch knowing this team is competitive and knowing that, you feel good about Florida coming to town. You feel like you should win this game and probably comfortably. So, it's crazy that it's went by so fast. I've thoroughly enjoyed covering Florida State this year. And obviously I picked a good year to start. So with that, we're just going to move into one quick thing before we totally get into Florida. Obviously, FSU picks up a commitment, a flip for Brock Glenn, 4-star quarterback. They were originally in the mix for him. That's kind of who they risked losing Chris Parson for. And, and they did. He decommitted and went on about his way. And then, you saw Brock Glenn go to Ohio State. And it was like, well, we played our hand for one and we lost both. But, when something we talked about way back when, even preseason, was this staff didn't have a whole lot to sell for quarterback at Florida State. Of course, you can point to things you did at Memphis and stuff like that, but, teams want to see it happen here with this coaching staff, with these players. And, before, when they didn't have a great offensive line, when they didn't, and I'm not saying they're great, but they're a lot better. When you had a bad offensive line and a bad receiving core, and Jordan, you're mix matching with 2 quarterbacks, And it just, like, if you were a quarterback, what was selling you on coming here? And, we talked about that where we said, just give them a chance. Like, if you're a defensive end, why would you not want to come to Florida State? They're sending guys to the NFL left and right. They're featuring these guys on a premier stage. And so if you're a defensive end, you'd be crazy not to come to FSU. But you needed a reason as a quarterback to buy into the system, to see what they were able to do. And that's what we've seen this year with the success of this offense, with the emergence of Jordan Travis. Now you're going to see, you got a 5-star wide receiver in the boat. You have passed, you have been one of the better passing quarterbacks. Now granted, you're not going to like blow anyone away on the stat sheet with yards and everything because they don't have to throw the ball a lot because they run it so well. And, now that you're seeing those things, you're seeing a legit pass game. Now you're going to draw interest from those types of players, from the quarterbacks, from the receivers. I'm sure you're going to get some, this is not the only thing that's going to be in store for Florida State, especially when you look at the running back position, the way Norvell is able to feature running backs. Again, that's a position where, why would you not want to come to Florida State and see what seeing what they're able to do with multiple guys? So it was nice to see them get the flip and get Brock Glenn back in the class, back in the fold, should I say. He was never committed to Florida State, so back in the fold. And I think this is good for you going forward because, with NIL and things like that, and with Jordan not having to throw a lot, I don't know, I think he is going to be back next year. I think he will return for one more season, which gives you a chance to let Brock Glenn come in and do some battle, learn the system and get right. You have Croman Hawk coming in 24, which I'm really excited about him. That guy, he can sling it. And so you feel really good about the quarterback position going forward. And, now that you have that 4-star quarterback in the fold, you're probably going to see a few more receivers take interest in this class, knowing who's going to be throwing them the ball. And so that is exciting to see because, like I said, initially I thought Florida State might have to go to the portal for a quarterback, which it's probably a little harder to get a quality quarterback out of the portal because, one, they're going to want to come in and start. And, if Jordan Travis does come back, or even if he left, he's going to have to come in and beat out a few other guys. And, you're not really going to keep too many anyway. You're not going to find too many secrets at quarterback because it's such a highlighted position. They were able to uncover Jared Verse against Syracuse on Albany film, and of course everybody else kind of figured it out once FSU did. But it's harder to find a gem at quarterback just because, everybody is looking at that position and, they're going to try and grab, whoever's in the portal that's a good, you don't see a lot of great quarterbacks go in the portal unless it's like a USC Oklahoma situation where, Caleb Williams followed Lincoln Riley. So, I think this kind of, if you can get Jordan to come back and then Tate stays and you keep the guys on, on the roster, maybe you keep Duffy, maybe, someone may go at some point. But as long as you can realistically, to me, keep the guys that you got in the boat, I think they're fine going forward at this position. I don't think they really need to turn to the portal at that point. So just, again, a big commitment for them, a big flip from Ohio State. Obviously Ohio State does very well with their quarterbacks, and it looks good. It's headlines. You're not flipping a kid or from a Group of 5 school or something like that. You're not losing a kid, which has kind of been more of the news for Florida State than anything, over the past few years. But now, like, you're taking a kid from Ohio State, and so that's big news. That looks good for FSU, looks good for the staff. It's a big recruiting win for them. Kudos to them not giving up and staying on him because, it could have been easily, nowadays with the portal too, things just change. Like, and he's not even enrolled to even bother with the portal, but, because kids flip commitment all the time, but even in the portal era now, like if you stay after a recruit, you can't just write them off anymore because they may be looking for a new home at some point. They might commit to a school and, they might not like it or they might not get enough playing time or, or maybe it wasn't as good a fit as they thought. So, just kudos to the staff for staying with the commitment or, staying with him and getting the commitment. So, for Florida, like I said, Florida State lands 4-star quarterback Brock Glenn for class of 2023. And yeah, guys, so now let's get into this Florida game. We just had, a few news pieces to catch up on, but now to the root of the matter, getting after Florida. And I don't know if you guys, again, I strongly encourage, if you hear this, to follow me on social media. I've been having some fun with Photoshop this week, just kind of making some things about Florida and all that because, That's what rivalries are for. Like, if you can't talk smack, if you can't, if you can't poke fun at each other and stuff like that, then what is the point of a rivalry? I mean, that's what makes it so fun, is being able to talk some smack and things. So we've just been having a little fun on social media. So like I said, I do encourage you guys to go over there and check that stuff out. But yeah, so looking at Florida, this is a game that, like we talked about, is huge for so many reasons: for recruiting, for momentum, for the good of the fan base. Because again, would leave such a bad taste in your mouth if they lost this game through the offseason, no matter what the bowl game does. But if they're able to get this win, then I think you feel really good about where you're at going into the offseason, because you should win this game. I think it's going to be more of a challenge in the last 4 weeks with the way Florida matches up. They do have some legit players, but Florida has been really inconsistent. They've had some good games. They beat Utah at home, and Utah I don't think is as good as people really make them out to be, but they are a good team. Like, I'm not gonna trash them because I'm not gonna discredit them because it was Florida that beat them. They're a pretty good team. And then they played a tight game against Tennessee. It was only a 5-point loss on the road. That's actually one of their better games. Now, to be fair, we just saw what happened to Tennessee against South Carolina. And, that defense is bad to let South Carolina torch them like that. So, they've had some good games. And speaking of South Carolina, when they beat South Carolina, I mean, they beat them 38-6. They held them to 6 points. They held them under 300 yards. And yet, that same South Carolina offense, now again, Florida, Tennessee's defense is terrible, but they were able to go out and put up over 600 yards and 63 points on them. So, like, there's some potential in there for Florida to play well. But then you also look at the flip side of things, and you look at the terrible games that they've had. They lose to Vandy on the road since the first time, I think they said it was since 1988. That's the year I was born. So that's like that's a new record for them. That's starting a new streak there, because I think they just lost to Kentucky like 2 years ago for the first time in like 30 years or something like that. At home. So they're setting new records over there at Florida. Then they almost lost to South Florida, who is 1-10 at home. Had South Florida been able to handle a field goal snap and execute the kick, that game at least would have been in overtime. And then, I understand that they beat A&M 41-24, but that game was really close at halftime. I believe A&M was even winning, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But they struggled to pull off from a Texas A&M team who is just absolutely terrible. And they had 19 players out with the flu, and you still kind of struggle to pull off from them. So it's kind of a head-scratching thing to watch, just how inconsistent they've been. And when you talk about inconsistency, you obviously have to mention Anthony Richardson too. I mean, he's been very inconsistent himself, and we'll get into his numbers a little bit more in a second. But when you look at his season as a whole, so far he's had 6 games where he threw for under 200 passing yards, but he's also had 2 games where he threw for over 400 yards. And so, like, you don't know who you're going to get out of this Florida team. And I'm hoping we get a bad one, but they're just inconsistent. And so you hope that Florida State can be able to jump out on them early. I don't think you're going to see quite as much quit out of them as you will Miami, but I do think that if you're, coming off a Vanderbilt loss, if you're able to jump out on them early, say, at the end of one, Florida State's up 14-3 or something like that, or, say at halftime it's like 28-10 or something like that, I think you're going to see a little bit of, all right, I've had enough of this out of Florida. So, I think it's important for them to start out fast, Florida State that is. Florida's got a linebacker suspended for the first half, which we're going to talk about. And, if you can get out on them, I think you have a really, really good chance in this game. Florida State nor Florida really needs any extra motivation for this game. I don't care what the records are and all that stuff. Like I said earlier, we talked about the rivalry thing with Miami. I understand that, you always have to take into account, like on paper, Florida State should have killed Miami, and they did. But you always have to keep in the back of your mind, well, it's a rivalry game, and that game's always close. So would it be closer than it was? And, you thought maybe that was some aspect. Well, turn around. It turns out it didn't matter. It was like a faceless opponent for them. They just went in there and had their way with Miami. But you still have to account for that. And I do think that is going to be present in this game with just the rivalry factor, I do think Florida's going to try and play the best that they can. And so it will factor into this game, I think, a little bit more than Miami, because Miami's just such a dumpster fire right now that it doesn't, I don't think there's much that can help them down there. So I do think it's going to be a little bit more passionate here, a little bit more heated and things like that, because you do have two more comparable teams, which obviously I think Florida State, again, on paper, should win this game, probably going away too. And by when I say two comparable teams, I just mean like Florida has the potential to be a decent team. They have the staff, they have some players and some depth and things like that Miami just doesn't have. But talking about motivation, Anthony Richardson did come out this week and say that when they beat Florida State, that'll give them some momentum. So, if you were looking for a little bit of bulletin board material, there you go. And, I mean, come on, bro. You just lost to Vanderbilt. Like, you might want to chill on saying things like that. So, but hey, keep on saying it. You know what I mean? I'm sure with social media, it's been the rounds. I'm sure everybody's in the locker room has seen that. It's just kind of a bold statement coming off a loss to the doormat of the SEC. But, hey, to each their own. But so when you look at this game, getting a little more into some stats on this, we'll just go through some numbers for each team. Florida State is currently floating around a 9 to 10 point favorite at home. The over/under on this game is around 58. Florida State comes in at 8-3, 5-3 in the ACC with a 4-game win streak. They are currently 4-2 at home and 8-3 against the spread. Florida is 6-5 on the year, 3-5 in the SEC. Currently on a 1-game losing streak and 1-2 on the road. So, obviously not looking too great in away games there. They're 6-5 against the spread. Now, one thing that is interesting that I do think we have to take into account when we look at this game is Florida is one of I believe the only team on Florida State's schedule this year that has a harder strength of schedule than Florida State has. And when we talk about, a lot of the things in the past games, we talk about, okay, here's the stats and here's the context around it. Here's what they did, but they didn't do it against as good a competition as Florida State. Well, Florida, on the other hand, has played some really good teams. You have Tennessee, you have Georgia, you have LSU, you have teams like that. So even Utah. So you have some tough teams that they played. So that does factor into it. Florida State is currently at 22nd in strength of schedule, and Florida is at 19th. So it's not a big gap. But like I said, this is one of the first, if not the first game of the season where you've had a team that's played a little bit tougher schedule than you have. Win probability on this one, currently ESPN, the last time I checked, has it at 76.9% for the Noles. PFF has it a little bit lower at 72.3% for FSU. As far as 70-plus graded players from PFF with a 50-snap minimum, Florida State comes in at 28 on offense, 12 on defense. Florida comes in at 21 total, 12 on offense, 9 on defense. When you look at the more advanced rankings, talking about FEI and S&P Plus, Florida State in the FEI rankings comes in at 10th, Florida at 28th. S&P Plus rankings, Florida State comes in at 24th, and Florida comes in at 39th. When you look over at the points per game, Florida State is currently scoring 35.4 points per game. Florida is down at 31.2. And points allowed per game, which this is going to be where you're going to see the difference in this game, is in the defense. Florida State is currently only allowing 18 points per game. Florida is up at 27.3. And we're going to elaborate a little bit more on that in just a minute against the better competition, because Florida's played some good teams, but they've also played some pretty bad teams too. And so yards per game, Florida State's at 473.7. Florida is at 439.5, so not too far off there. Yards allowed per game, big difference. Florida State at 293.4, Florida at 408.5. So they're giving up, their defense is pretty bad. It's actually the worst defense statistically right now as of the current rankings that Florida State will face this entire season. So yards per play, Florida State is at 6.87, and Florida is at 6.81 yards per play allowed. Florida State is at 4.57, and Florida is at 5.88. And, one thing talking about yards per play and everything, as far as like yards per play and yards per play allowed on offense and defense, Florida State is the highest, if not one of the, if not the highest teams in the country. They have the most explosive plays in the country and have allowed close to the least. I'm not 100% sure if it is exactly the least, but it just really speaks volumes to what this team has been doing. I mean, you are in the company of like Ohio State, or I mean, like Michigan and Georgia. This team is really playing at an way above average level, and that's one thing that has, side note, real quick sidebar here. I'm so tired of this narrative that Florida State was some kind of horrific loss for LSU, because Florida State is a better team than people are giving them credit for. They're number 16 in the country. They're probably going to, if they win this game and you get some teams lose ahead of you, they're going to be inside the top 15. I mean, let's be honest. I think if they play again, I think Florida State wins again. And they might even win by, more than one score, because, I mean, they struggled with Auburn. They struggled with a couple of other teams. They struggled with Arkansas. So I do think that Florida State would, I think they would win again. And, you're realistically a fumbled snap and, a bad call where the tight end, the clock should have expired, away from that game kind of being, Florida State dominated for 3/4 of that game. So, that narrative is just getting so old. And when you see things come out with the playoff committee talk and everything, it's just, man, it's like someone needs to throw some respect on Florida State's name, because they're a better team than people are giving them credit for. And I think they would beat a lot of the teams in the top 15 as they're playing right now. So back to the Florida game. I just like that, man. It's been bothering me lately, seeing all that. So it's like, hey, it's just kind of like the UCF thing. Like, they argued that they were ranked there, and that Florida State wasn't that good, and then they lost to a 3-win Navy team. So that argument pretty much solved itself. Back to Florida. So average penalties per game, Florida State is at 108th in the country. Florida is at 67th. So a little better on your penalties there. One area that you're gonna have to watch out for in this game for FSU, and this was kind of the case against like Georgia Tech and things like that. This is how you let a lesser team stay in the game, and it's turnover margin. So Florida State is positive; they are at +2 in the turnover margin, tied for 52nd in the country. Florida, and I checked this twice just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me, or I hadn't recorded the wrong stat. They are +10 in turnover margin. They are 8th in the country. So, if you want to win this, like if you look for a path for victory to Florida against Florida State for Florida, you're going to have to rely on Florida State to make some mistakes. You're going to need those turnovers to give you those extra possessions, because I just don't think they're going to be able to stop this offense, not consistently anyway. And I do think Florida State's defense will be able to get more stops. But, the more at-bats you get, the more chance you have. So Florida State's going to have to be diligent about taking care of the ball. And so we're going to run through, I know this preview is going to probably run a little bit long, but like I said, we had some things to talk about beforehand. So we'll try and make it relatively quick. But I just want to have some fun with you guys and just talk a little smack on Florida week. But so looking at their schedule, we'll run through it real quick. The first game of the season, we know it was a good win for them. I hate to say it, I hate to admit it. It kind of actually woke me up a little bit. I was kind of like, all right, well, I didn't expect that. And Utah should have, man, they were right there. They could have got it in there and upset Florida, but they did win that game 29-26 against Utah at home, who is currently 8-3. They put up 451 yards in that game. They allowed 446 to Utah. This was one of the games that came in at under 200 yards passing, only at 168 yards. But they did rush for over 200 yards. And Florida is a legit rushing team. They are top 15 in rush offense. So it's something that Florida State has struggled with in the past. But they've gotten a lot better now that they got Fabian Lovett back, because he's such a crucial piece to stopping the run up the middle. And so they did rush for over 200 yards in this game. This was probably Florida's best game of the season. Utah got really close to getting that game, but, they weren't able to capitalize it there at the end. Anthony Richardson in that game was 17-24, 168 yards, no touchdowns. He did rush for over 100 yards. So, he is a legit run threat, too. You're going to have to watch out for him. So, game 2, they lost to Kentucky. At the time, Kentucky had some high aspirations. Now we know that Kentucky's not very good. They're currently 6-5. It's a mess there for Stoops. They lost to Vanderbilt, too. So maybe Vanderbilt's not the doormat of the SEC anymore. But Florida in that game was held to 279 yards, which Kentucky has a pretty good defense, but their offense ain't great. And Kentucky did put up 272 yards in that game, which is not a whole lot. So Florida's defense did pretty good there, but their offense is so bad. Like Kentucky, I don't know what happened there. They were supposed to, they had Will Levis and all those things. It just ain't, it's not going too well for them. When this was another game, though, when you look at it, Anthony Richardson in this game, 14-35, that's terrible. completion percentage, 143 yards, 2 interceptions, 1 pick six, a QBR of 2.4. Woof. That is, that's just bad. They were 4 of 16 on third down, and, they got 2 points from a safety in that game, so they only put up 14 offensive points. 6 attempts, 4 yards rushing for Anthony Richardson, only 7/10 of a yard per carry. So it was a really bad game. And I believe it was like up to game 4 where Anthony Richardson had more tackles than he did touchdowns, which was kind of an insane stat for a quarterback. Then you look at game 3, they had USF at home. They won that game 31-28. South Florida is 1-10. I mean, they outgained Florida in that game, 402 yards to 329 yards. Florida only put up 112 yards passing in that game. And when you look at South Florida, they were able to rush for 286 yards. Now, they only threw for 116, but when you look at what Florida State's been able to do on the ground as a legit rushing attack, then, one of the best in the country, it makes you feel like they'll be able to have success on Friday night against Florida on the ground. So, and like I said, USF, they had multiple chances to win that game. They just couldn't seem to close it out. In that game, Anthony Richardson was 10 of 18 for 112 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and a QBR of 6.9. Youch. You know what I mean? That's just it's inconsistent. It's just inconsistency because he does have some good games, but man, that's like the first few games are rough. Now I will say that he has gotten a little better over the course of the season, but man, those first few games were just pretty bad. Game 4 they lost to Tennessee 38-33. Tennessee obviously we know is 9-2 and a legit team, especially at home. That was a good game for Tennessee. Florida, to be honest. I know a loss is never a good game, but to lose that close against Tennessee was a surprise because I thought they might get run off the field. Florida did put up 594 yards in that game, almost 600 yards. Anthony Richardson had 453 passing yards, one of his best games. But man, again, like we said, keep in mind that Tennessee defense is just terrible. They do sell out to stop the run, which you can see here because Florida had 453 passing yards, 141 rushing yards. And if you're getting thrown on for 450 by Anthony Richardson, your secondary is some toast because, that's kind of hard to do. But they do, they admittedly, they sell out to stop the run and they make teams beat them through the air. And they almost picked the wrong poison there. But to see South Carolina put up over 600 yards with who's not a good offense, it's just kind of like, okay, well, it looks good on paper, but you got to take the whole picture of knowing they put up 600 yards against one of the worst defenses in the country. I think Tennessee is around 100th in total defense. But now they did put up Tennessee themselves. We know they are one of the better offenses, top 5, if not the best offense in the country. They put up 576 yards in that game, 227 on the ground, 349 through the air. So, you see again here a second straight game of them giving up over 200 yards, which is their third game so far doing so because Utah was able to put up 230 on the ground too. In that game, Anthony Richardson went 24 of 44, 453 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. So again, a better game, but not that, his completion percentage wasn't that great, but he was able to, he threw for 450 yards and 2 touchdowns, so not terrible. Just look who it was against. Game 5, they beat Eastern Washington 52-17. There's not a whole lot to really talk about in this game. Eastern Washington is a 3-8 FCS team. They've been blown out 6 times this season already. There's not much to talk about in this game. So we'll just, Florida put up 666 yards, and 392 pass, 274 on the rush. Big whoop. It's a terrible team. I mean, they did what they were supposed to. So I'm not saying anything about that, but Eastern Washington did put up 411 yards on them. So that is just something to keep in mind there. I don't know how much of that was garbage time stuff, but they did put up over 400 yards on this defense. Game 6, they beat Missouri 24-17 at home. Missouri, not great, 5-6 on the year. They played a couple teams close, but it's not been a successful year for Missouri. Florida got held under 3 yards and not 3. That would be hilarious, but under 300 yards in this game, which, hey, Miami was trying to get held to 3 yards in the first half against Clemson because I think they set a new record for like the least yards gained in a half. It was insane. But Missouri put up 370 yards in this game, and it's interesting because when you look at Florida's stat breakdown, they only put up 66 passing yards. Like, yes, that is a real number. That is not I don't even know how that, 66 yards passing is kind of crazy, but and still win the game. But Florida was able to put up 231 rushing yards. So again, they do have that legit rushing attack that you have to be aware of at least. So Anthony Richardson in that game was 8 of 14, 66 yards, one touchdown, one interception. And Florida did have a pick six in that game, so they realistically, they only put up 17 offensive points there. Game 7, they played LSU, lost 45-35, which is funny because I swear there was a certain fan base that said that Florida State beat a trash LSU team and that win wasn't that good. Was it Florida? Anyway, so they lost that game 45-35 against LSU. We know it's 9-2, good team, very good team, better than a team from Gainesville. Florida put up 395 yards in that game. Again, got held under 200 yards passing in this one, but did rush for over 200. And then LSU put up 528 yards on them, 349 passing, which is pretty impressive for Jaden Daniels, and 179 yards on the ground. So they do drop that game. And when you look at Anthony Richardson, 15 of 25, 185 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions. He did rush for 9 attempts for 109 yards. So, it's just LSU's a good team, and they were able to beat them. But this is still, like I said, that's an LSU team that Florida State beat. And I understand Game 1 versus Game 7 for LSU may be a little different. But, also playing in the Superdome versus getting them in the swamp, that's a totally different animal. So when you move on from that and you look over to Game 8, they lost 42-20 in a neutral site game against Georgia. That's played in Jacksonville. I was actually at that game. Like I said, I go down, I do the Georgia-Florida thing. They're pretty much as often as I can because it is a really fun time. And, the funny thing, I saw someone tweet out the other day, one of the bigger accounts, they tweeted out like the biggest rivalries in sports. And first off, it's a flawed list because they left Florida State, Miami off of there. So obviously, historically, I understand lately, I understand that, but historically, that's one of the biggest, if not the, one of the top 5 rivalries in all of college football. But he also had Georgia, Florida on there, and trust me, like that is it is a rivalry game. It is a big rivalry game between two states. I understand two SEC East teams that don't like each other, but man, I commented on when I saw that post, I was like, as a Florida State fan who frequents that game, I think the hatred between Florida and Florida State is a little more than Georgia, Florida. Because when I go down there, I still wear garnet and gold. Like, I'm that guy. I'm not wearing any other colors. I'm just not doing it. And so more Florida fans, and I always tell my Georgia fans this, I'm like, you watch who they say something to. And, more Florida fans seem to go out of their way to say something to me than they do anyone wearing red and black. So, it is a rivalry game, but I still think that's a little more heated between the two in-state schools. But anyway, Florida did lose that game 42-20. And, Georgia's a good team. They're 11-0. They're number 1 in the country. I think my takeaway from actually watching them in that game is their offense is just not that impressive, and it just wasn't. Now, they were able to come back and make that game. I think it was 28-20, 1 point in the second half, and then Georgia, because Georgia was making some mistakes. Stetson threw a few, like a pick, and they had a fumble, let Florida get back in the game, which is exactly what we're talking about. We mentioned that earlier. You can't let them get them turnovers and hang around, because that's exactly, like, Florida couldn't really do anything in that game, and Georgia was just, they weren't able to score enough points to dominate them. But when you watch the game play out, they were dominating Florida. And then they made a couple mistakes, and they let a couple turnovers happen, and Florida got back in the game before Georgia was able to right the ship and pull off. But in that game, Florida put up 371 yards, and Georgia put up 555 yards. And Georgia's offense, to me, I know statistically it might be better. Georgia plays a pretty weak schedule. They have not. I think Florida State's offense is as good or better than Georgia's for sure. So, seeing them put up 555 yards against Florida, that makes you feel good. They're another team that's good at rushing, just like Florida State is, and so they put up 239 yards on the ground. So you feel good about what Florida State should be able to do there. And that's not to say Georgia's offense isn't good. It's just I don't. When I look at their schedule, they haven't played a ton of tough teams. So in that game, Georgia did have 3 turnovers, which is what we talked about. So, again, that's something you cannot let happen in this game if you want to close it out and go ahead and put Florida out of their misery early. but they did average 6.0 yards per rush, which is good, which is something you'd like to see Florida State be able to do in that game. Florida was 4 of 16 on third downs. In that game, Anthony Richardson was 18 of 37. Again, not a good completion percentage. 271 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, 11 carries for 19 yards. So didn't get much going on the ground there. Game 9, they beat Texas A&M 41-24. Texas A&M is 4-7. Like we said, they had 19 players out. Florida put up 492 yards in that game, rushed for almost 300 yards. So again, they're a legit rushing attack that you're going to have to look out for. A&M did have 2 interceptions in that game, kind of let things hang around. But A&M was leading that game 24-20 at halftime. So like I said, man, it's just been an up and down season for them. Game 10, I think, was one of their best games of the season. Not for necessarily who they did it against, but how they did it. They won 38-6 against South Carolina. They really just kind of dominated that game. It was 7. South Carolina 7-4, just beat Tennessee. So they're not. We know South Carolina's not a good team. They're on the way to being better, but they're not good yet. Florida put up 515 yards in that game, rushed for 374 yards, which is that's a boatload of yards. No matter who we're talking about here. And then South Carolina was held to only 237 yards, which, again, like we talked about, the next week they come out and put up over 663 points against an equally bad defense. So, Florida, it's just such an inconsistent team. You just don't know who you're going to get from week to week. In that game, South Carolina had 3 turnovers and 11 penalties. So, like I said, you can't let this team hang around with turnovers because that seems to be where they make their living is by getting turnovers and to keep them in games. And so Anthony Richardson in that game, though, it wasn't necessarily his passing that won him the game. He was 11 of 23, 112 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So, he threw for 2 touchdowns, but 11 of 23 for 112 is just not that great. He did rush for over almost 100 yards. And then we know last week, game 11, they lost 31-24 to Vanderbilt, who's 5-6. So Florida put up 445 yards in that game, outgained Vandy, who only had 283. They did throw for 400 passing yards. And the most wild stat of this game is coming from talking about 374 yards on the ground against South Carolina to only 45 yards against Vanderbilt. They couldn't get anything going. And I'm assuming, what Vanderbilt probably did was take a page out of a few of those teams' book where they just tried to load the box, stop the run, and make Florida beat them through the air, and they couldn't do it. Now, they gave up 400 passing yards, but, they still won the game. And so both teams had 2 turnovers. Florida only averaged 2.1 yards per rush, and they were only 4 of 15 on third down. So you can obviously tell, like I said, that they bet against the run, and I think that's not a bad bet, when you have an inconsistent quarterback and no real dominant threat out wide. And so, just getting in, that's going to wrap up their schedule there. So just a couple notes on the schedule as we get a little bit further into the preview. Florida's combined opponent records this year is 68-53. The records for their wins are 28-38. So it's not like they beat a whole lot of good teams. They have only 4 wins against Power 5 teams. As you know, they also beat a 1-10 South Florida and a 3-8 FCS school. So only 4 wins against Power 5 teams, and those Power 5 teams are 24-20. And keep in mind, one of those is Utah 8-3. So when you look at the rest of it, they've kind of beat a bunch of bad teams. And so when you look at the offenses they have faced this season, again, they have faced some pretty tough competition. Now they had the number 1 offense in Tennessee, the number 7 offense in Georgia, the number 25 offense in Utah, 34 LSU, 68 USF, 77th USC, 89th Mizzou, 95th Vandy, 96 A&M, 107 is Kentucky and an FCS school. So not all dominant, but they did have, they did have 3 top 25 offenses, which is most than what the other teams have faced that you've played. Florida State does come into this game at 16th on offense, so it will be, right up there with about the 3rd best offense that they have faced. Now, the good news for us is knowing that Florida gave up over 500 yards to Tennessee. They gave up over 500 yards to Georgia. And now you're coming in kind of right behind all them, averaging over 475 yards a game. So, Florida got torched by both of those offenses. And so it makes you feel good about what Florida State's chances are to have the same kind of success. When you flip over to defense, so far this season they have faced the 5th best defense in Georgia, 19th in Kentucky, 24th in Utah. So again, 3 top 25 defenses. 31st, 33rd, 50th, 85th, 100th, 125th, and 131st, dead last in the country in an FCS school. So they haven't quite faced the hardest defenses now. Like we said, they did face Georgia, Kentucky, Utah, Missouri, and LSU, who are pretty good. A&M's top 50 defense, but it's not been all lights out defenses that they've had to face. And Florida State comes in with the 11th ranked defense currently, so they'll be the second best defense that Florida has faced this season. Now, the reason I bring up the top 50 is because it's different when you play different levels of competition. You can obviously beat the brakes off of a bad team and put up 500 yards and things like that. But when you are matched up against someone who is a quality opponent, how do you perform? And so what I like to do is I like to look at how teams have performed against top 50 offenses and top 50 defenses. And so when you look at the top 50 offenses that Florida has faced this year, so Florida's defense against the top 50 offenses, they have allowed 33.6 points per game. We know their season average, like we mentioned earlier, was 27.3. So they're giving up over 6 more points a game when you look at the better offenses that they've had to face. So that, keep in mind, you're a top 16 offense, and they are allowing 33.6 points per game to the top 50 offenses. Now, when you look at a top 50 defense, which Florida State also has, Florida has an average point total this season of 31.2 points per game. But against top 50 defenses, which is also 3 of them, that number drops to 21 points per game. So 10-point drop off. So when you look at the tougher competition that they've had to play, they've kind of struggled against it. And just for reference, when we talk about Florida State in the same breath of top 50 offenses that they have faced 3 as well, the same as Florida, and they're currently allowing an average of 28.3 points per game to top 50 offenses, compared to Florida allowing 33.6. Against top 50 defenses, we know Florida has faced 3. Florida State has faced 6 top 50 defenses so far this season, and they are averaging 31.8 points per game scoring against those defenses compared to Florida's 21. So, Florida State has been better against better competition when you look at the numbers against top 50 offenses and defenses. So, getting into Florida's offense real quick, they run an average of about 68 snaps a game. They do pass the ball around 48.1% of the time, run at 51.9%. So, they are a run-heavy team. They are currently 33rd in total offense, which, is not bad. It's one of the better offenses that Florida State will face. Passing offense is 67th. Like we said, it's inconsistent at times. It's not a great passing offense. I mean, anytime you can throw for over 400 yards in multiple games, it doesn't suck. But, you've also been held under 200 yards passing in 6 games. They just don't really have, a dynamic threat out wide at receiver. When you look at the rush offense, it is 15th in the country, and the rush EPA rank is 3rd in the country. So, Florida State's defense is going to have, it's work cut out for it to stop this ground game. Third down offense, they're currently converting 39.9%, which is 58th in the country. Red zone offense is 119th in the country. So, they have not been good at getting points once they get down to the red zone. Like I said, 119th in the country there. They have been pretty decent at protecting the quarterback, which I'm sure Anthony Richardson's ability helps that out, because they have allowed 133 pressures this season, which is not insanely high. But, it's pretty high for only allowing 11 sacks, which is 11th in the country. So, Florida State is going to be able to get some pressure back there, but, he's a harder guy to bring down, which obviously, his size and his ability to run influences that. Now, Florida State has faced a few mobile quarterbacks with Jaden Daniels and Malik Cunningham already, so you kind of know you kind of know how to prepare for that type of quarterback already. But this guy has some size on him. He's harder to bring down than, a smaller quarterback. So if you hit him, you're going to have to wrap him up, and you're going to have to get him to the ground without losing containment, because that's where he can really hurt you. And so tackles for loss allowed this season, they are 15th in the country in that. So they've been okay at limiting some of the negative plays. And just getting into Anthony Richardson, like I said, he's a bigger guy, 6'4", 232. This is his 3rd year at Florida. On the season, he has a 54.8 completion percentage, so not that great. 2,354 yards, 14 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Pretty high interception rate there. Big time throw rate is 5.4%. Turnover worthy play rate is 3.3%. Those are all right numbers. Not really good, not really bad. About average. Adjusted completion percentage is 66.3%. PFF grade of 80.9, which is pretty decent. He has come on lately. He has gotten a little better as the season progressed. You saw some of the single-digit QBRs early on in the season. Now he's at a season QBR of 71.7, which is 32nd in the country. So not that great, but not as bad as it was. To be fair, I know I always wear garnet and gold colored glasses, but to be fair, he has gotten better over the season. 57 attempts on the ground, 671 yards, 9 touchdowns, 5 fumbles. And so, like I said, you do have to be aware of his running threat. And, he's just like the thing with Richardson, he's got an absolute cannon for an arm, but he's really like he has accuracy issues. He has touch issues. He has a hard time not launching a ball out of a cannon for a guy that's 5 yards down the field. He had that last second. He had a last ditch effort against Vanderbilt, and he threw it in the stands. He's got no touch. He's got no accuracy, which has been a problem for him. Now if he can put it together, he's got the tools and the mechanics to be a quarterback. But when you look at his passing depth, his short passes, which is 26.1% of their offense, his completion percentage is only 59.5. His PFF grade is 38. He has 3 touchdowns and 4 picks, and that's passes from 0 to 9 yards, which goes to show you he has some pretty bad accuracy issues. Because if you can't, most quarterbacks you see in that range are like 80 to 90%, and so to be at 59.5 that's pretty tough. And his mid-level passing is a little better. That's 27.1% of their pass plays, 62.2% completion percentage, PFF grade of 86.9, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. So he's pretty good at the mid-level throws. That's 10 to 19 yards. His deep passing is pretty good, but of course that's because, like I said, he's got a cannon, so he can get it down the field. And they only run deep passes about 18.5% of the time. He does have a completion percentage of 42.9, which sounds low, but that's pretty good for deep passes. 7 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a PFF grade of 93.2. So realistically, for Florida State's secondary, if they can keep things in front of them, and if they can, not get burnt over the top and him connect on the deep ball, you got a pretty good chance to stop their short and mid-game passing. And as far as pressure goes, like I said, he's been able to avoid some sacks, but he has been pressured 37.2% of his dropbacks, which is a little high there. As far as kept clean, he's got a completion percentage of 62%, and under pressure is 39.8%. So you definitely need to try and get some pressure on him there. PFF grade kept clean is 90.5, and under pressure is 48.9. So, if you can get pressure on him and not lose containment, I think you got a pretty good chance at forcing him to have a bad day. As far as impact players on offense go, you have Justin Shorter outside at wide receiver, 6'4", 223, a bigger guy, lines up out wide primarily. 56.9% catch rate, which is not that great. 577 yards, 2 touchdowns, contested catch rate of 50%, and a PFF grade of 74.5. So not too bad there. Ricky Pearsall, however the heck you say his name, he's a Florida player, is not important. I'm just kidding. 6'1", 200 pounds, primarily lines up in the slot. 54.3% catch rate, not the greatest again. 455 yards, 3 touchdowns, contested catch rate of only 12.5%. So, if you can get in his grill a little bit and play aggressive as a DB, he's probably gonna have a pretty bad day against you. And then Xavier Henderson, 6'3", 195, lines up in a mixture out wide and in the slot. A little better catch radius here at 72%, and 406 yards, 2 touchdowns, contested catch rate of 50%. So those are the 3 guys that you have to watch for at receiver. Obviously, talking about how they do have a good ground game, you have to mention Montrell Johnson, running back, who came with Billy Napier from Louisiana. He does have 128 carries on the year, 742 yards, averaging 5.8 yards per carry, 9 touchdowns and 1 fumble. So, anytime you're averaging almost 6 yards a carry on the ground as a back, that's good. PFF grade is 77.9. So he's a solid back. And he has 11 receptions for 64 yards out of the backfield, so not a whole lot in the receiving game. And then they also have Trevor Etienne, who is, he's a good back as well. He's a little smaller, 5'9", 217, but he does have 93 carries on the year for 576 yards, which equates to 6.2 yards per carry. So again, another solid back for them because he is over 6 yards a carry, 5 touchdowns, 1 fumble, and a PFF grade of 77.2. 8 receptions, 57 yards out of the backfield. So not a whole lot there in the receiving game. But like I said, they have 2 good backs, and it also helps when you have a running threat quarterback like Anthony Richardson. who's able to open some things up. You have that third running, or that extra, should I say, extra running threat coming out of the backfield. And, a lot of their success does get accredited to their offensive line. They are not anything like amazing. They are not like a typical what you would think of with Alabama offensive line or anything like that. They're not overly dominant, but they're not bad either. They all grade out pretty fairly, to good on PFF. They're a veteran group. They have a lot of experience. The center's probably their worst graded player up front. So, they have played a majority of the snaps at their position. It's not like they've rotated a lot of guys. All their guys have, like I said, a pretty good experience at the position. So it is a solid offensive line. It's not great, but it's going to be, one of the better offensive lines that Florida State's going to have to play this season. Like I said, they're good on the ground, and I do love Florida State's defensive line. I think they're going to have a successful day against these guys, but you're going to have a little bit of your work cut out for you. And so that's Florida's offense. Like I said, not great in the pass, pretty good on the ground. You're going to have to, like I said, you're going to have to bring a lunch because it's going to be, it's going to be a battle in the trenches. It's going to be a battle to stop this running game. And, that is Florida's one ticket to really stay in this thing. And so next up, we'll move over to the defense real quick. Florida defense currently ranked 98th in total defense, 86 in pass defense, and 92nd in rushing defense, which is music to my ears when you think about Florida State at 6 current games with over 200 yards on the ground. So that is nice to see. Their rush D EPA rank, which is, like I said, a little bit more advanced stat. They're 115th in the country, and rushing success rate on defense is 107th. So it's pretty bad across the board as far as their rush defense goes. Third down defense, terrible as well. 127th in the country, 48.3% stop rate there. Red zone defense is 76th in the country. Not too great, not too bad. They have created 155 pressures on the season, and for reference, Florida State has created 196 on defense. As far as sacks go, Florida is currently sitting at 91st in the country with 19 sacks on the season, so not a big number there, only averaging 1.73 per game. Contrast that to Florida State, who's currently at 33 sacks on the season, averaging 3 sacks per game, and is 13th in the country. So Florida State has been really good at getting the quarterback on the ground. Tackles for a loss per game, they're 75th in the country, averaging 5.5 per game. Florida State in that department is 41st in the country, averaging 6.4 per game. Interceptions this season, they do have 9 picks on the year, which is 54th in the country. So again, they're a pretty opportunistic team as far as the turnover battle goes. And some notes on this defense that I do think you have to take into account. First off, they had an unexpected departure in Brenton Cox Jr. After the Georgia game, it just kind of came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, he's off the team. And the reason I say that's significant is because even though he has not played in the last 3 games at all, he's not even on the team, he is still tied for the most pressures on the team. So that was a big loss. Now, we know as well as anybody that sometimes you have to make a tough decision for the locker room, for the culture, for things like that. That's something that we saw work out for Norvell. Sometimes you just have to get rid of some guys for a greater cause. So I don't know the or the scenario around it. I don't know why it happened. If Napier felt it was necessary, then it probably had to happen. But it was still a big blow to their defense. You lost one of your best defensive linemen, one of the best guys at creating pressure. Again, he's missed 3 games and he's still tied for the leading pressures on the team. So, you have to keep that in mind too when you go back and look at some of the things that they've done. That's also with Brenton Cox there, and he's not there now. Then you also look at, like we talked about early in the show, we hinted at they had a linebacker out. Well, you have Ventrell Miller, who is basically, in most opinions, their best linebacker on that defense. He's going to be out the first half for a targeting call against Vanderbilt. And when you're already down some guys, and your defense is not great, that's a big loss because we have seen, and the reason I say it's so significant is we have seen Florida State jump out on teams and then kind of coast to the second half. Now, I know a lot of that's because they got the backups in and things like that, but, Florida State has jumped out. Even NC State, they jumped out early. And so if you have a guy who's out, one of your best linebackers who's out for the first half, Florida State can get things going and get a little bit of a lead on them at halftime, then that could be big in this game. So that is something to watch. It is a big factor in this game. and they have allowed over 200 rushing yards 4 times this season. Again, that's great news for everyone in Garnet and Gold, knowing what Florida State has been able to do on the ground. And, when you factor in, again, you're out your best linebacker in the middle of that defense, you could see some real opportunity there. Now, they do have some guys, to look out for. They do have some players on that defense. They do have a good defensive end, number 33. I'm not even going to attempt to say this gentleman's name. It's Princely something. I'm just going to leave it at that. But he has created 21 pressures, 5 sacks, 2 forced fumbles up front. So, like I said, they have a couple pieces now. Against Vandy, he had 0 pressures, 0 sacks, and a PFF grade of 55. So it's, and he played the whole game. He played 43 snaps. It's not. I tried to make sure it wasn't like, he didn't play much or anything like that. He has a very poor tackling grade of 41.8. So, like I said, again, they have some guys on that defense that aren't terrible, but it's just a bad defense as a whole, and you've had to dismiss some guys from the team. You got some guys out. And like I said, statistically, when you look at the rankings, being 98th in total defense, it is the worst defense that Florida State has had to face so far this season. And, when you look at some, like Wake Forest, I think is your next highest at 88th. And, like I said, when you look at what Florida State's been able to do against some of the lower rated defenses, even the better rated defenses, you can easily see them getting into the 30s in this game. On special teams, just to touch on that real quick, kick return, they're 60th in the country. Kick return defense, they're 86th in the country. Punt return defense is 54th in the country. Punt return is 54th. Punt return defense is 94th. So, they're not great, not awful, just kind of in the middle to not good, average to below average as far as their special teams play goes. Now, they are 3rd in net punting. So, they are pretty good in that department. But, Florida State may have some opportunities to make some things happen in this game. Hopefully, Michael Pittman's okay. He did get shaken up after kind of taking a shot in the hip against, in that kind of groin, upper leg injury area against Louisiana. They say he's fine, so hopefully he's back and able to be back out on special teams this week. I think he will be. I think it's probably just more precautionary. You didn't have to put him back in that game. Now, they have had their own struggles at kicking, and, thank goodness we've seen, knock on wood, we've seen Ryan Fitzgerald be able to kind of get back in the swing of things, but they are 37-37 on PATs, but they are 10 of 16 on field goals. So they've had 6 missed or blocked kicks, 3 of 5 from 50+, so they don't have a ton of range there. So like I said, that's a good thing to see too. Part of their red zone struggles obviously is, similar to what Florida State has had, where you just haven't really had a kicker that you can overly rely on. And just so wrapping up here, now that we've pretty much covered everything, when you look at this game as a whole, like I said, you have the rivalry aspect that could keep things closer. You have, it's a rivalry game. Florida has, a few pieces that are okay. If they show up to play, and I suspect they will, if Anthony Richardson comes ready to play, they could make it a game. And so I don't want to just completely act like Florida State is going to just steamroll Florida, because they've played some tough teams. They have played some top 50 offenses, some top 50 defenses. They've, and things like that. But when you look at their resume as a whole, again, they're just very inconsistent. And, you don't know who's going to show up. I heard people say there was a lot of look ahead last week to Florida State, maybe why they dropped Vandy. But, that's inexcusable. You know what I mean? That's the thing that's the difference between the two teams is like, okay, so you were looking ahead to Florida State. Florida State obviously wasn't looking ahead to you because they've come out and beat every team handily. So, I think Florida State is a better team. I think they're playing better football. I think they have a better coaching staff. I love what Norvell and them have been able to do as far as game planning this season, and I think that'll be no different this week. I know that I know they are well aware of the challenges, and I know they are well aware of the weaknesses that they can attack. I do think Florida State will be up for this game. I think they will be ready for this game, but I do think they will stay focused and disciplined. I don't think they're going to let their emotions get the best of them because, they did well with that against LSU in that environment. They did well against Miami in that environment. I think Florida State gets, obviously you have the home field advantage, which is going to be big. Maybe not huge against a team like Florida that's used to playing in that environment, but it's going to be loud. It's going to be crazy. It's going to be a Friday night. So it's obviously going to be advantage FSU. And then just continuing down the line, like there's just a lot of things that if Florida State shows up to play, if Florida State limits the mistakes. If Florida State doesn't make a lot of turnovers, again, not to sound cliche, but this is really what Mike Norvell preaches, is a game just like this, where it's about you. If you just focus on you and make sure you, as Florida State, do the best you can to put yourself in a position to win, and don't worry necessarily about the opponent. Florida State should come out and beat them. They don't have really many, if any, impressive wins besides the first game of the season. They've had some real stinkers this season as far as games with Florida. And so like I said, I really do think that this is one of those games that if Florida State comes out fast and they start early and they really get on Florida, and they come out playing, they can open this one up. And trust me, you can just get a vibe from Norvell that he is ready to put his foot on that program's throat and keep his foot on the gas, because you can tell this means something to him, and he knows how much this means to the program and the fan base and everything there. And this, this is an important game, and I do think just with recruiting and how crucial everything is in an in-state rival, that he knows this is an opportunity. You have an opportunity to get a struggling Florida team in year one of a new staff, just like he got Miami. And if you can come out and make a statement against them, it's going to play really well going into the offseason. And so, like I said, I do think Florida State will come out ready. I do think they will come out swinging. I do think they will be as aggressive as they have to be without think out of control or anything like that. And I think they'll have a successful day on the ground. I like Florida State on the trenches in both sides. I think they're a better team right now. I think they have a more consistent quarterback in Jordan Travis. I think they have just as good or better rushing attack, with a better passing attack to go along with it. I think they're a more complete team. Like I said, given a rivalry, given they have some pieces, it could be a close game. I just don't see it really going that way. Florida State and Norvell may even have a little bit of revenge on the mind from last year when you had that kind of inexcusable loss to an interim staff that kept you from getting bowl eligible and kind of continuing a good run at the end of the season that they had after the 0-4 start. So when we wrap all that up, like I said, to me, this is that if Florida State shows up and handles their business, they get it done here. So I'm going to take the Noles over the Gators, over the Jortwares, over the Shark Humpers, over the shoe throwers, whatever you want to call them. Give me the Noles 38-20 to handle their business, get to 9 wins, and focus on getting hopefully a 10th win in a bowl game, going 2-0 over your rivals. Again, nothing's guaranteed, but you just got a feeling that they're hungry and they're ready for this game, and they sense blood in the water, and they're going to go after them. And so I do feel good about this game. So give me the Noles to win this one. And I appreciate you guys listening. I do appreciate everyone who has tuned in this season. And hopefully you check back in for the bowl game. We're going to stay pretty active here. I got some things I want to work on in the postseason and everything like that. So you guys stay tuned, stay connected. Again, I appreciate all your support throughout the season. And let's go Noles. Go out there and smoke these Gators, and let's have a little Thanksgiving feast on some Gator tail, because that sure would be awesome. Like I said, if nothing else, I'm just thankful that I'm a Nole and not a Gator or a Hurricane, because that's got to be a tough life. So, yeah, guys, we'll catch you guys on the other side of this one on a Friday night primetime game in Doak Campbell Stadium. What a heck of a way to close out the season, the regular season anyway. And let's get it done, guys. Let's get it done, and we'll catch you guys on the other side. Thank you for listening, and go Noles.